I would first like to thank the powers that be at the club for supporting this initiative. I want to start with the most powerful person in the room. That's Ron Drake, the chair of the Business Forward Council. Ron Gonzalez, the newly implemented chair of Board of Governors. Bruce McKenzie, General Manager, and Eric Lopez, Director of Member Relations. So let's hear it for these powerful folks. Okay, so we're going to go right into our panel discussion. Audience members, if you have a question, hold that question. We'll open it up to questions for roughly 35 minutes into the program, and we'll wrap everything up at about 8 p.m. So I want to thank our two panelists for coming today, Ann Chang of Hyundai Cradle and Quinn Garcia of Altec. Jeff Peters couldn't make it, but Quinn is his able colleague, so I like to have both of them. So round of applause. So we'll start right off. Introduce yourselves, and let's tell us about what you do.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Ann Chang. I'm an investment director at Hyundai Cradle. Hyundai Cradle is the investment team and arm for Hyundai Motor Company. We look at making strategic investments in automotive and mobility-related technologies and new businesses.
Hi everyone. My name is Quinn Garcia. I'm one of the managing directors of Autotech Ventures. So as Rob was saying, my colleague Jeff Peters was supposed to be here tonight, but Jeff had a baby, so he's in the hospital, and so you guys got downgraded to me. So sorry for that. But I'll do my best to fill in for him. So we're a VC firm based up in Menlo Park. We have about $300 million under management. We invest in transportation startups, so ground transportation related startups, movement of people and goods along the surface of Earth. So primarily software and services, a little bit of hardware. Actually, just today, it was announced that Apple acquired our portfolio company, Exnor, computer vision related company. And we recently sold DeepScale, another computer vision company, to Tesla. And our portfolio company, Lyft, went public, and they obviously have a substantial autonomous initiative. So we love everything related to ground transport, and excited to be here and chat with you guys.
All right. We'll start with basics. What are autonomous vehicles?
I'm just the fill-in guy.
I see how it is. All right, well, I'll start. But with autonomous vehicles, I think most of the time when people refer to autonomous vehicles, they're referring to vehicles that meet level 4 to level 5 level of autonomy. So the Society of Automotive Engineers, SAE, has a scale of autonomy level 0 to level 5. So level 0 is completely no autonomy. Level 1 is usually what you can think of smart cruise control. Level 2 is usually cruise control with some form of steering and automatic braking. Level 3 is smart cruise control plus maybe more in terms of being allowing the driver to keep their eyes off the road and maybe having the driver only take over the vehicle at certain points in time. And then level 4 and above, level 4 and 5 is really where you get the driver, there's no intervention, there's no takeover at all. Anything to add?
Only thing I would add is just kind of some examples that kind of make it stick for me. If you think about level 0, you're talking about 1960s muscle car, right? If you talk about level 1, maybe your 90s, 2000s, early teens vehicle with a little bit of intervention, a little bit of safety feature, and then level 2, you start getting into the more advanced features that are on the cars that are produced today. Level 3 might look something like a Tesla and some of the Super Cruise type vehicles, and then level 4 would be like one of these Waymo vehicles where someone needs to intervene every once in a while. The vehicle can drive autonomously, but then every once in a while you encounter snow or a flag man in the road or some other awkward scenario, and then someone needs to intervene. Level 5, you can completely ditch the steering wheel, and we think that's more than 10 years off.
When will autonomous vehicles become mainstream? in the US and globally? Sure. Exactly one.
So in the U.S., so we kind of think about it in terms of vehicle application and geography and level of autonomy. So what does that mean? Places like the U.S. or Singapore or China or other places might be more quick to adopt autonomous vehicles than, say, places like India. So if you talk about developing nations, they'll probably be more slow. In India, I point out specifically because the government has actually come out and stated that they're not in favor of autonomous vehicles. One of the few nations on the earth that has actually said that. I presume because it's a labor issue in India. So in India, there's less economic incentive to eliminate the driver because the cost of drivers in India is relatively low. But also, a lot of people would be out of work in India if you were to eliminate all those drivers. So it depends on which geography, and even within the U.S., you're going to have certain geographies in the U.S. that are going to more rapidly adopt than others, right? Places like Arizona or here are going to be faster than places like North Dakota in the winter, right? And then you can also think about it in terms of vehicle application. When most of us talk about autonomous vehicles, we're usually talking about cars, right, or trucks to a lesser extent. But there's many other applications of autonomy that are useful, right? So factory automation. Ann and I were just chatting a little bit about factory automation before this. There's a lot of unmanned warehouse vehicles that are running around moving goods inside of a factory or distribution center. Or you can think about mining applications. Like there's autonomous mining trucks today that have a proven ROI that are operating right now from Komatsu and Caterpillar and the like, right? You can also then think about long-haul trucks. Long-haul trucks are probably on a similar time frame as robo-taxis and cars, right? Because they both operate on public roads, and thus the government regulatory implications are greater than, say, a place like a mine, where you don't have many babushkas and kids and whatnot running around that can get injured. Same holds true for farms. Those tend to be private property, just like mines are, or construction sites are. And so we think that the time to market in those applications is going to be much faster than on-highway autonomy.
I also think in Rob's original question, it was, the keyword is mainstream. So when we think about, when I personally think about autonomous driving, what I really imagine is this wonderful vehicle that's going to come to my house, pick up my kid, send them to piano lesson, and pick them up from piano lesson, send them to soccer practice, right? So I think that application, I'm not going to put a year on it, but it's definitely probably 10 years or more out, 20, 30 or later. But like Quinn mentioned, there are a lot of these, whether it's geofence or a more simplistic application for autonomy, I think those will come much faster, and those still can make a difference in our lives.
Quinn, you touched on this a little bit, but how does the commercial vehicle sector differ from the private vehicle sector? Trucks, buses, that kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah. So commercial vehicles, the definition is a vehicle that's used primarily to make money instead of for private use, right? And traditionally, the commercial vehicles we view as, let's say, trucks, or we talk about mining vehicles, or construction vehicles, or even inside of a factory, you have these forklifts and dollies and whatnot. The definition of commercial vehicle, and I think that commercial vehicles are actually going to expand beyond those traditional applications, because I think we're going to have an increasing penetration of commercial passenger vehicles, right? So cars are passenger vehicles, and historically, with the exception to taxis, they were primarily used for private use, right? And now we're seeing with the penetration of Uber and Lyft and otherwise, you're seeing increasing commercial use of passenger vehicles, right? And then we're also seeing increasing penetration of light delivery vans. So like Amazon has now all these kind of Amazon Prime and other types of vehicles that are running around delivering packages, and those are also perceived as a great application for autonomy, right? So we think about let's say Class 8 trucks, long haul trucks, really strong application for autonomy because they drive long distances. There's a driver shortage. fuel and the driver are pretty much the most expensive pieces for operating one of those fleets. So there's a very strong economic incentive for the fleet operators to ditch the driver by going autonomous, both in terms of reducing cost of driver, but also in terms of reducing cost of collisions. Right? I'll just kind of leave it for Anne for the rest of that.
I also think in the commercial vehicle space, it's maybe a little bit more structured in terms of, you're selling usually to a fleet owner of who owns, let's say, 100 delivery vehicles, right? So in that sense, a lot of times, when the fleet owner wants to adopt new technology, he or she can dictate that into their fleet, right? Can mandate that to the rest of their fleet. Whereas with kind of the general public, maybe I prefer the safety features, but my husband, doesn't like them, wants to turn them off, for example, finds them annoying. Or, what we find a lot of times is people do weird things in their car. They kind of, the HMI, the human machine interface between the driver and the car is usually not as what we expected when we originally designed the feature. So I think those things make it a little bit more difficult for cars and features that are available for the general public. But in the fleet or the commercial vehicle market, usually adoption, once the fleet owner wants to adopt a technology, is more straightforward.
Who is investing in autonomous vehicles? Venture capitalists, car companies, Apple, Amazon, etc. Who are some of the major players?
We are. Definitely.
Besides,
Yeah. I think, in terms of investment, I think there's several different types of investment. So like Hyundai, for example, we have our own R&D investment, right? So we recently announced that we're going to invest over the next 5 years, $35 billion into both autonomous as well as electric vehicles, right? So that's mainly for internal development. But we also have money allocated for joint ventures. For example, we recently announced a joint venture, a JV with Aptiv, which it used to be part of Delphi, right? So a major tier 1 supplier. And that's also for autonomous vehicles. And then we have kind of what my team does is more on the venture side, right? Looking at startups and doing equity investments. So in that sense, I would say, Hyundai kind of covers a broad spectrum of different types of investments that we do. But there are other, Autotech, for example, is one of the other premier VC groups that also invest in automotive.
Yeah, and outside of VCs like us, whether it be corporate venture capital like Anne's group or an independent VC firm like us, we're actually we VC firms are only a small fish compared to the majority of the investment that's going into autonomous. Actually, corporations, Anne's parent company and other OEMs, automakers, and tier 1 suppliers and tier 2 suppliers are putting in way more dollars than we puny VCs are into this space. Other groups, aside from corporations that are investing heavily in this space, are governments. Governments want to become the next hub for economic development related to autonomous. And so Michigan, for example, has been pumping big bucks into autonomous vehicle testing grounds and other kind of incentives for facilitating development of autonomous out there. Same holds true even for places like Hungary that you wouldn't expect. Hungary is actually producing these autonomous vehicle test tracks. So governments are actually a substantial source of funding for this, in addition to VCs, large corporations, universities are also conducting quite a bit of research into autonomy as well. Although their money is not coming out of their own pockets, coming from governments and corporates, and not so much from VCs.
Maybe I might also add, in 2018, there was over $10 billion of venture capital money invested into autonomous vehicles. I think in 2019, I haven't seen the number yet, but it's not quite 10 billion, but it's also multiple billions.
How will autonomous vehicles change life as we know it? And what about the legal, economic, social, logistical implications?
Sure. So I personally, and I think other people in our firm would agree with me when I say this, I think that autonomous vehicles are going to have the largest impact on our society and our economy since the internet. And I think that it may actually be a larger impact than the internet. Like the internet kind of facilitated movement of information, but autonomy is actually going to facilitate very low cost movement of atoms. Right, so the internet moves electrons, which is basically data, information, but atoms have historically been very expensive to move. And once we eliminate humans from the picture, it's going to get a lot cheaper. Still going to be more expensive than moving information, but I think it's going to be enormous. I think that the primary impacts become evident to pretty much everybody. Like suddenly, 35,000 people that die every year in this country are not going to die, right? What's that mean? Suddenly you have entire segments of our population, whether it be blind people or kids or elderly people that can get about, right? What does that mean for parenting? What does that mean for taking care of your aging parents, right? And then if you think about secondary impacts, the ones that become a little bit less non-obvious, what does this mean for the healthcare sector? Right? If our emergency rooms are being clogged up by quite a few traffic casualties and fatalities, right? What does that mean for all the people that are caring for all those crashes? What does that mean for the ambulance industry? What does that mean for police, right? If suddenly autonomous vehicles aren't committing traffic violations, right? Where does all that government revenue come from? And where do all the people who made their livelihood on vehicle crashes? Where's their next job, right? So we often think about the drivers, and the drivers are going to be eliminated, right? But there's a whole host of other people whose livelihood depends on our present paradigm, right? What happens to organ donors? We're gonna have a reduced number of organ donors as a result of this, right? So what happens to parking? Right, so a lot of the real estate in urban centers is committed to parking, whether it be street parking or off-street parking. And right now, you're starting to see those little parklets popping up, right, in urban centers like San Francisco. Maybe they have them here in San Jose, but suddenly you can repurpose a lot of that street parking, or you can repurpose even your garage at your private home if you don't own your own vehicle anymore to some other use, right? So big secondary and tertiary impacts that lead me to make that statement that I think it's going to be the largest impact on our society since the internet.
Elon Musk, presidential candidate Andrew Yang, and others have suggested that we need a universal basic income because a lot of workers and a lot of drivers will be disrupted by the mass adoption of autonomous vehicles. Your thoughts on that?
I think the Democratic debate was last night, right?
He wasn't on.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, so for Hyundai, we have a group that sits in DC and works with policymakers, right? And so I think in that regard, we're very cognizant when we talk about autonomous vehicles because of, like Quinn said, what's going to happen to the drivers, what's going to happen to all these other industries. And so I don't have a good answer here today, but I think that's something that as we adopt this type of new technology, we're very cognizant about how are we messaging it, right? And how are we having people adopt it, whether it's more incremental or whether or not it's really going to be disruptive.
Yeah, as the son of a politician, I'm blissfully ignorant about politics. Actually, my dad used to be the senator representing Silicon Valley many years ago, and ever since then I've been blissfully ignorant about politics. So I don't really have a view about universal basic income. What I can just say from my personal life experience is that usually technology doesn't immediately, overnight, put masses of people out of work. It's usually a slow transition, and I think that autonomy is going to be no different. It's going to be slow and steady adoption of autonomy. It's going to penetrate, by different vehicle segments and different geographies at different rates. And yes, it's absolutely going to put certain people in certain jobs out of work, but just as all the people who were displaced by the internet were slowly but surely rehomed or reallocated to other jobs, I think the same thing is going to happen here. If it did happen overnight, and maybe that's a concern for India. Maybe that's why the government's come out with some of those statements, is that they actually kind of fear some massive social upheaval if this enormous segment of their population suddenly doesn't have a job. But it ain't going to be that easy, and it's not going to be that fast. So we'll see.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to add, I think it was last year, there actually was a bus driver strike in Ohio, in a community in which they were testing autonomous shuttles. So I think the issue is real. But to Quinn's point of view, I think, it's not going to be an overnight change. We actually have a portfolio company that uses camera and AI to help drivers. It's kind of assisted driver, what we call ADAS, right? Advanced Driver Assistance Systems in the vehicle. And so the way that our portfolio company has positioned it is more in terms of it's helping the driver rather than it's kind of slowly taking over your job, right? So in this application, it was for commercial fleets. So these are truck drivers. And I think that's really an important message that you need to convey to your customers and those who are using your technology.
Oh, sorry, just one other thing that you reminded me of that. And so there's a truck driver shortage out there right now, all across the U.S. And I don't know what the statistic is, but in the majority of the states, of our 50 states, number one occupation is truck driver. Is it like 30-something states or 40-something states is truck driver, right? But there's this massive shortage for truck drivers. So in the near term, you would imagine that autonomy would actually alleviate that driver shortage, but then eventually become painful for a lot of people once it penetrates further. There's I just saw that movie about Jimmy Hoffa and the Teamsters Union, right? They remain, despite Jimmy Hoffa being missing, they remain a very powerful lobby. And so, unsurprisingly, in some of the federal policy frameworks around autonomous vehicles, there was no trucking policy framework. It was just for passenger cars initially. And I think they just came out with another policy framework, and I don't know if trucks were included in that framework or not. But my point is that Teamsters Union, they know what's going on, and I think they're concerned about what's happening with autonomy. But in the near term, it'll be more alleviation of a shortage than it will be putting a bunch of people out of work.
What do you see happening in the next 5, 10, or 20 years or beyond with regard to autonomous vehicles? Would you like to make a prediction on video? Go ahead.
Please.
You can pass if you want.
No, I think I said 2030 or beyond for, what we really hope for is fully autonomous level 4 and level 5. I do think over the next 5 to 10 years, there's a lot of work that has to be done, not just on the technology side, but also on the government side. So Quinn mentioned the importance of the governments and cities. I do think the government, both at the federal as well as the state level, needs to start creating, so there's some initial legislation, but there needs to be a much stronger framework in order to allow companies that are developing autonomous vehicles a good sense of, where are the boundaries, right? And for example, I think this week the U.S. Department of Transportation just announced an effort, an initiative to try to standardize all of the kind of level 2 and level 3 features that are available on the market today, because what Hyundai calls as lane keeping might be called something different by Toyota or Ford or GM, right? And the conditions in which you're going to operate could be different. So these features have already been on the market for a while, and the government is now kind of saying, oh, actually we need to kind of create a standardized platform and a standard language around it. So in some ways, I think in the next couple of years, the government is playing a little bit of catch up in that regard. and then moving forward, hopefully taking a more proactive stance in terms of autonomous vehicles.
Yeah, predictions. Kind of depends on, going back to my comment earlier about geography and level of autonomy. As I mentioned earlier, I think that level 5 is more than 10 years out. I think that level 4, well, it's already here in pilots, and it'll increasingly grow in terms of geographies, right? So they're geofencing those vehicles right now, and they're slowly and surely going to expand the scenarios in which, and geographies in which those vehicles can drive, whether it be the ones operated by Lyft, our portfolio company, or Waymo, or Cruise, or maybe Hyundai has an initiative as well where they're piloting them. I think that in the mining space and ag space, I think that we're going to be able to have more rapid penetration of AVs in those worlds because the safety implications aren't as great, and the government regulatory implications also aren't as great. The pace at which we automate kind of farm labor as a service. So we have a portfolio company that's essentially creating these autonomous robots that run in orchards, trees, and it's farm labor as a service, right? And there is, in addition to a truck driver shortage, we also have a farm labor shortage, right? So we have a lot of political things going on here in the U.S. that I'm oblivious to, but those political things are also happening in other parts of the world. So Brexit's happening, and there's this speculation that a lot of folks in the UK with Brexit, if it happens ever, from Eastern Europe, there may result in a farm labor shortage out there, and I think autonomy can assist that. How does that translate into an actual time frame for automating picking of apples and cherries and other things? I don't have a firm view on that. I will say that one lucky thing about being a VC is you only have to think in 10-year increments. So we manage 10-year funds, and so we don't have to predict how things are going to play out in 30 years from now. We just have to figure out short term.
All right, you're off the hook then. All right, let's hear it for Ann and Quinn. Applause. So now we're going to open it up to audience questions. We want to make it an interactive session. Joe, do you have the handheld mic for recording? No. That's okay. We're going to pass the mic around. I do want to say that it's not a pitch event, so please no pitches or thinly disguised pitches. If you attempt one, we have a bouncer in the room. I'll let you guess who that bouncer is, or who the bouncer is. Are you the bouncer?
There you go.
So,
I was just going to move the mic around. I'm not
right there.
bouncing.
Teresa, you have a question? That's okay. He's got it.
Hi, Quinn, I have a question for you. When we are driving today, we have this fights between husband and wife for choosing the wrong lane, or the kids kind of bothering you in the back and you kind of shouting at them, or whatever it might be. How do you factor these human factors and the enjoyment we are having, we reflect back on when we invest in these new companies? I end up telling my kids, hey, when we were kids, we used to walk to school, and they want us to drop off. And now there's nobody to drop off. I mean, how does that change take place, and how do we digest that in the light of we have longer lives?
Yeah. So how does culture change? How does society change? Human interaction change with the advent of autonomy? Does autonomy allow us more chances to interact with each other, or does it actually just further segregate us and become the kind of the transportation equivalent of looking at your phone instead of hanging out with your friends, right? That is a great question, my friend. Wish I knew. Our advisor, Secretary Fox, so our advisor of our firm used to be the U.S. Secretary of Transportation. You'd think as kind of a politician in quotes that, but he's thought a lot about that, and I think he could speak much more eloquently than I could on that. One thing related to human factors here, I think that we're going to become horse drivers. So when we were not augmented and coddled by all these safety features that the vehicles have today, we actually had to navigate many more scenarios than we presently have to navigate, right? I tried to back up in a car, actually Teresa's car. I tried to back up in a car, and it didn't have a reverse camera, and I was like, well, what do I do? I have to turn around and actually like make sure I don't bump into that thing behind me, and now they have self-parking, the self-parking mode, and when I really do feel when I'm in one of those really advanced cars, I feel a little bit more at ease than when I was driving one of my 71 Chevy Nova muscle car, right, drag race car. I feel a little bit more at ease, and then I catch myself every once in a while and say, well, actually, this thing is not going to save you, right? If you get into a really bad scenario, it might save you in a few scenarios. So I think we're going to get worse at driving. And one of the big challenges, and Anne would know this better than I do because she actually works for a company that develops these things, and I'm just a consumer of them. But one of the big challenges that a lot of folks are talking about is the handoff between human and vehicle in this age of level 2, level 3, and maybe to a lesser extent level 4, right? So you're driving along, and your untrained driver who hasn't been driving in hairy situations that much anymore is suddenly asked to intervene because the car can't navigate a scenario. And after I've been kind of dozing off or reading my book in a different mental state, I'm forced to come in and make some critical decision related to my own safety. That's a hairy issue. So human-machine interface and kind of human factors there's a lot of discussion around that right now. But in terms of your question about like human connection, like what does this mean for bringing us together or segregating us further? I don't know. I don't have to think about that.
Real quick, my wife has a car without a backing camera, but worse, it's a stick shift. So every once in a while, when you hand the keys to one of these valets, they say, "Miss, you're going to have to park the car for me." So we're already getting worse.
Let the valet take up.
Next question.
Oh, yeah, Anne, you have
No.
I'd like to know, what do you see as the greatest impediments to the development and the future? Is it technological? Is it regulatory? Is it human adoption? What do you see as the greatest impediments to adoption?
I think it's all three. So technology, business, and legal are the legislative framework. For technology, I do think there remains to be a huge number of technical challenges. There are a lot of edge cases. There are a lot of kind of scenarios that we might not have been able to test. Quinn also talked about the handoff to the driver. I think that's a really tricky situation. I mean, if you want to talk about automation, you think about, it's not the automotive industry, but the aerospace industry, right? The 737 MAX. So I think part of the problem was in that situation, Boeing kind of overestimated how alert or how great the pilots would be in terms of being able to take over the plane when they needed to. And I think that same situation will happen in the vehicle, right? So, our engineers, I think, a reasonable driver could take over within 5 seconds, right? But maybe in reality, it's going to be much longer, or, things that they didn't think about. So I think technology is one, technical challenges. Business, I think, is one, especially for autonomous driving in terms of carrying passengers. So I'm not talking about mining or agriculture. I'm talking about my dream car that comes and takes the kids to all their activities. And in that case, there are pilots out there that do that are geofenced, that are somewhat autonomous but very low speeds, but they still have a safety driver in them, right? And we still haven't been able to take the safety driver out, and that's both a technical challenge, but also that affects the economics of the business model, right? So I think, how do autonomous vehicles make money between now to when they actually reach fully autonomous? And then on the legal side, I think it's kind of what I said, the government creating a framework, being clear about what companies can and cannot do, and then every state oftentimes also has their own rules and laws.
Yeah, I agree with Anne's comments. I would add that I agree that there's really those three kind of constituents. If I think about, who are the parties that allow certain technology to be adopted, it tends to be the end users, the end buyers, customers, let's say. It also tends to be large corporations, and it tends to be governments. And they all kind of react to each other and serve as proxies for each other. I think that all three parties believe that autonomous vehicles are good for the planet. I haven't actually heard too many objections to autonomous vehicles just because the benefits seem so obviously great. If you think about electric vehicle adoption some years ago, there were quite a few folks that were speaking out against EVs in the past, and the oil lobby being one of them, right? You don't hear as many vocal detractors to autonomous vehicles as you did some years ago for electric vehicles. I do think that in some applications, the government's really not going to play much of a factor, and that's where it's not running on government land, right? So farms and warehouses and construction sites and mines, regulation I don't think is going to play a big role. It's going to come down to economics and capital markets and free markets.
I had a question in regard to, you talked about the India scenario and how there's some concern there. Are you anticipating any pushback or concern from, for example, the National Trucking Association, the Ambulance Associations, those large groups that their job is to make sure they have people who are employed in that world? Is that a concern?
Oh yeah, the driver labor unions. I mean, we were talking about the Teamsters union, and I'm sure there's a bunch of other analogous unions. Although I haven't heard them come out and say we shouldn't do this. I think it would be political suicide for someone to come out and say that, because it's just it would almost seem disingenuous to say that this is not going to be a good thing for society long term. And so I think what a lot of those groups are saying is hey, let's do this in a slow and steady and responsible pace, rather than let's not do it at all.
Question about safety. I think it's implied in both of your talks that safety is going to be enhanced by autonomous vehicles. But I think that is really, it's a whole picture, right? There's got to be regulatory. Why would you say that autonomous vehicles alone will increase safety? Because you get surrounded by drivers. I mean, it's really kind of an ecosystem kind of thing, right? Not until all the pieces. At this point, all we hear are really bad stories, which is probably not fair, because only bad stories get reported. But I just want to hear you elaborate on that.
So I think the question was around safety and why we assume kind of automatically autonomous vehicles will be safe. I think that's our target, right? That's one of the reasons, that's one of the key drivers why so many people are working towards autonomy, right? It's because we want to create vehicles that can maybe drive more safely than humans in certain situations. But back to the question about challenges, is on the technical side, one of the challenges is driving is actually a very complex process. It's maybe we don't feel like it when we drive home, but there's both, there's a technical problem in terms of a physics problem, right? Like my speed, where are all the other vehicles located? What speed are they? What direction are they headed in, right? And then there's also a social aspect to driving, which is how do I interact in a way with all the other agents around me, whether or not they're cars or pedestrians, cyclists, or the construction worker on the side of the road, right? So I think that kind of that social aspect also makes it very difficult for autonomous vehicles, right? That's a very technical challenge because right now, as a human, we're kind of predicting in our minds how all these other agents might behave, and we're reacting to that, right? So I think we would only launch autonomous vehicles where they would be much safer than the human driver, where they're able to address some of these problems.
Yeah, I can add a little bit to that. I think we hold machines to a higher standard than we hold ourselves. I think autonomous vehicles today, many of the best designed ones, maybe not the ones designed by Uber, Lyft shareholder right here, but the ones maybe designed by Waymo or others, right, or Lyft, I think many of those are safer than human-driven vehicles today. Majority of most crashes today, let's call it 90%, of collisions today are not due to failure of the vehicle, like a blown tire or what have you. It's driver error, right? And so if we can just reduce that, and I think that with today's technology, we could already do that. But we as a society, when we tend to tolerate humans killing other humans via human error more than we could tolerate a machine doing that. Right, which is kind of silly, but hey, that's we're humans, and that's life. And so because they're held to a higher standard, we're all gonna have to wait a little bit longer just to make sure and be prudent and responsible and make sure that they're far safer than human drivers.
For Quinn, currently economics of ride sharing of Lyft and Uber they're losing $3 per ride. So if you're doing 1 million rides a day, which I think Uber's doing, they're losing 3 million a day. So more ride, the more they lose. How do you alleviate that?
So the unit economics for rideshare vary by geography, right? So overall, Lyft and Uber are losing money, right? Overall. But that doesn't mean that they're losing money on $3 on every ride, right? So their overall economics, if you include SG&A, and if you include all the new markets they've entered, in addition to all their mature markets, yes, they're overall losing money. But in certain markets, those guys are making money on each ride. And as they've both gone public, the public markets have pressured both of them to become more profitable. And so they have been kind of squeezing both sides of the marketplace. You may have noticed that sometimes your Lyft and Uber rides are a little bit more expensive than they were when we investors were subsidizing them, or we private investors were subsidizing them, right? And you might hear that the drivers are saying that that Lyft and Uber are taking a little bit more of each ride than they were, and that's because there's pressure on those companies to go public. So my opinion, and I haven't looked at their latest financials, but my opinion, they're not losing $3 on every ride. You have to look at kind of the blend of the mature markets and the new markets in which they're entering to kind of discern which ones are profitable and which ones are not. You can also cut it not only by geography but also by product, right? So if you think about the bikes and scooters that Uber and Lyft have gotten into, I highly doubt those are profitable today. If you think about the Lyft XL vehicle versus the standard Lyft versus the Lyft line, those all have different kind of profitability levels that also vary by geography. You can imagine high density areas like San Francisco, where you can fill a lot of butts in seats in that Lyft line product or the analog, which is Uber Pool. You can imagine a higher profitability in those markets than other geographies where you don't have as great population density and usage of rideshare. So I think that those companies are going to move toward profitability. They both come out with their estimates. I don't have any inside information, by the way. I'm not giving investment advice, by the way.
Hi, you both touched on safety and how important that is for the autonomous industry, and how one of the greatest challenges is the unpredictability of the driver, right? The human error aspect of this. In automation, a lot of times we see a segregation between the automated aspects of the process and the human aspects of the process. Do you think we'll have to see a similar segregation in the autonomous vehicle sort of rollout? Right now, we said we have geofenced areas, we have private spaces where we're testing these vehicles. But do you think we'll have to do sort of a rapid switch over from 90% drivers to 90% autonomous?
I think you're talking about, the question is around market adoption, is that right? I don't think it's going to be such a dramatic switchover. I think what we've been mentioning before is there kind of is already these level 4 applications, pilots I should say. They're geofence, They're usually low speed for certain safety reasons. They all have safety drivers in them, if not two, a driver and an engineer next to them. So I think this is what you're seeing is it's not going to be this dramatic hockey stick like a lot of startups kind of predicted maybe 2-3 years ago. It's going to be a much slower market adoption. And I think both for safety as well as, there are a lot more technical challenges in this market than what people originally thought.
And if I'm understanding you correctly, I think you're talking about the commingling of human-driven vehicles with autonomous vehicles. And I think that's related to your question earlier about safety implications. And are we actually having a bunch of fallible humans who make all these errors and crash all the time, commingled together with these kind of perfect robots who don't know how to respond to unpredictable humans? Is that kind of the gist of your question?
Yeah.
So my take is yes, there's going to be a bunch of snafus along the way with we having our industry having programmed vehicles to expect a certain human behavior and getting some other human behavior. There's going to be corner cases and bugs and snafus, and we're going to have to solve those. And there's going to be some lives lost along the way. It's probably still going to be for the best for society, even though some lives are going to be lost along the way. I do think, though, based on and I'm not an autonomous vehicle engineer, but based on my understanding of the way they're engineering these vehicles, I do think that they're engineering them in the way to coexist. Waymo has, and others, well, everyone actually, who's developing an autonomous vehicle today is engineering them to coexist with human-driven vehicles because everyone believes that humans are going to be on the road for another couple decades. Maybe eventually, in certain parts of the world, human-driven vehicles are going to become prohibited. So if you think about like horses, right? So it's now prohibited to ride your horse in downtown San Jose, right? It's just too unsafe, right? You can imagine the same kind of zones being created in the future, and the human-driven vehicles might eventually be relegated to the Santa Cruz Mountains and Pageville Road and Skyline and whatnot for leisure purposes up there where all the horses are.
So that means I can't ride my horse on the side road?
Don't know.
Do you have a comment, Ann? I didn't want to interrupt.
No, I was just going to say, I think the teams that are working on autonomous driving right now are testing in real world situations, right? Even when it is geofenced, it's usually still interacting with other vehicles or other real world situations, because we realize that, if you've ever been stuck behind an autonomous car that's driving very conservatively, it's very frustrating for the human driver behind it, right? So we realize that, and actually that can often induce humans to drive, cut off the autonomous vehicle or do something dangerous, right? So we want our autonomous vehicles to drive like a human in certain aspects, but more safely. So in that regard, I think real world testing is very important to us.
Question on a little different angle. I'm just interested in your business opinion because of your roles that you play. Do you think that Elon and Tesla have a long-term viable business model, or do you think their assets will be sold to a real car company in the future?
I think he was looking at you.
I think we have a lot of respect for Tesla. I think Tesla is a real company, and I think it is here to stay. They have really helped us push the electric vehicle market forward, as well as in the autonomous vehicle technology. They've been the first ones to really push the envelope in terms of autonomous, right? And say, maybe, incorrectly, right, fully autonomous or self-driving when it's not completely. But I think the overall effect on the industry has been positive. It's really kind of, set the bar pretty high for the rest of us.
No fire sale. I think even in downside scenarios, I think what you're asking is what's the likelihood that Tesla gets sold in a fire sale, if Tesla goes bankrupt or otherwise, right? Downside scenarios. I think, you know, upside scenario, I think they could become the most valuable car company in the world. Oh, wait. Oh, wait a second.
That's what the market is right now.
Yeah. They could also, no, but I mean, that's what the market says, and right? They could also become one of the highest volume and most successful in terms of financial returns company. I think that is possible. I think the downside scenario is also possible. But I don't think the downside scenario results in Tesla disappearing. I think they've created enough brand equity, they've created enough technology, they have enough talent, they have enough other kind of now physical assets with gigafactories popping up all over the place, that even in a downside scenario where Tesla's EV lunch is eaten by a lot of the incumbent automakers coming back with their EV offerings, and Tesla doesn't meet their targets and they get into a cash pinch, I think there's still plenty of folks that would love to pay billions of dollars for those assets. There could be folks from China coming in and saving them. There could be incumbent automakers. There's plenty of tech giants who would love to buy them. So I don't think Tesla goes to. I don't think that the whole kind of value of the company goes to zero. Let's just say that.
I'm following up on the same question that a lot of the folks in the room spoke about, the co-mingling of autonomous cars with human drivers. I was wondering if the NHTSA is looking at any scenarios where dedicated lanes would be marked for autonomous vehicles. Like, I think we have been talking about the barrier to adoption, and one of the biggest barriers to adoption for the autonomous vehicles to be out on the roads is the fact that there are other humans driving 90% of the cars. So at the government authority level, is there any discussion happening on dedicating? I know there are places in Europe, etc., where truck lanes have been dedicated, but what are discussions happening in North America?
So I don't know. I'm not sure what NHTSA is doing in terms of allocating roads for AVs long term. I haven't heard of too many initiatives for that here in the U.S. I would venture a guess that there are various pilots around the U.S. and for a stretch of road for a period of time, we're going to allocate this to AVs. I would be surprised if there are any long-term initiatives to create roads just for autonomous vehicles or even just lanes for autonomous vehicles. And what makes me feel that way is that even if you create a special lane for that vehicle, it's going to have to merge at some point. It's going to have to get on or get off if you're talking about the highway, right? And once it gets off the highway, it's going to have to navigate city streets unless you're going to go into human-driven mode and have like a ride and tie driver that comes in and hops in there. So I don't actually see massive benefit long-term in creating special private lanes. And I also don't see benefit in creating a complete separate road system because it would just be too expensive. And I don't think that the engineering challenges are so great to justify laying down that much fresh road.
Yeah, I would also add that roads in general take a long time to build. And, just what I've seen kind of in where I live, they've been working on kind of this expressway, right, for quite some time, trying to put in all of the electronics. And
I'm not talking about building roads, just dedicating.
Dedicating a lane.
Yeah, I mean, even I think that would take some time. And I'm not sure if this is correct or not, but in dedicating lanes, such as like carpool lanes, I think there are several different stakeholders. It's not just like Caltrans coming in and saying, in this stretch of lane, we're going to have one or two carpool lanes. I think it's Caltrans plus the city in which the highway goes through also has say in that.
This is a very, very interesting subject, obviously, and I think we can keep the panelists here till 10 or 11 at night asking questions, but we're not going to do that to them. So I'm sorry for those who didn't get a chance to ask. Go ahead, Rob.
Well, let's give it up for Ann and Quinn. So, stick around, network, socialize, connect. Thanks for coming, and we'll see you next time.